We know that you could be doing anything with your time week after week, but the fact that you share it with us, we wanted to say thank you. Every one of you that have taken time to leave us a review, comment, or even share our podcast on your social media truly means more than you will ever know. We like to read the reviews from time to time, and here's a couple of the reviews that we have been given recently. I am a new listener and basically binge listening to catch up, and I am here for this. I love interviews like this where you can hear real people sharing real life and navigating all the things with the leading of the Spirit. Thoroughly enjoying these conversations. This podcast has been such a blessing in my life. I've listened to them on my way to work. I've shed tears listening to some episodes, felt convicted in others, motivated to be who God wants me to be, and just simply been encouraged. I look forward to every episode and every woman that has shared her heart. Thank you. I appreciated this episode. This is making me want to do what God wants me to. I cried on this episode. God is really making me feel uncomfortable to be unashamedly me. Thank you. Knowing that this podcast could play a small role in encouraging all of you amazing women of God honestly feels bigger than any dream I could have ever imagined for this space. I wanted you to know that your reviews and comments are all read and they are not taken for granted. Thank you so much for being here with us in this space. Hello and welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast, a space to enlighten, encourage, and empower you to go out and unashamedly be who God is calling you to be. I am your host, Jamie Herndon. I pray you hear less of me and more of Him as you listen to today's episode. Let's grow together. So I have someone on the podcast today, and she is a lady that we've actually heard about on another podcast. She was a part of Sister Robin Burgess' stories, and I thought, wow, I would love to meet and interview her. And then I took my daughter to the Esther Conference that Sister Burgess puts on, and she was there. She told her story. She had me laughing and crying and about every emotion in between in like 5 minutes. So afterwards, I had went and I introduced myself to her, and essentially I pretty much told her she's already been on the podcast in mention, but we would love for her to come on here and to share her full story with us as well. So thankfully she agreed, and she is on here today to share her story with all of you. And what a joy to have you on the Unashamedly You podcast, Donna Linville. You are a special lady with a special story, and I'm just grateful you're on today. So take a moment and introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be on this podcast with you, Jamie. And I listened to the podcast that you had with Robin Burgess, and it really blessed my heart. And so today I want my life in Jesus' name to bless someone. But I'm Donna Linville. I'm from Tupelo, Mississippi. I grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, and I married my sweetheart. I met him in college, and then we went full-time into the ministry for about 50 years. And then the Lord decided to take him to heaven 4 years ago. And so the church asked me to continue to pastor it. And I've been pastoring it for 4 years now, going on 5. And that's been a challenge. And one reason is my husband had pancreatic cancer. So through those years of him being sick, I was able to help him at the church. And then the church just said, no, you've got to keep doing it. Even the pastor passed away. But it is a joy to be here, and so many things. One of my main hobbies is I am an avid reader. I love to read. I grew up in where every Saturday we would go get a bag to the library and just fill it full of books. And I still am that way. Right this very moment, I have about 6 books going on. I'll read 2 or 3 chapters or 4. It really has to be a good book for me to continue to read all the way through at one setting. But now I've got about 6 books. I've read each one about 4 chapters, and then I'll finish it, but I just have to go back to them. So that's my hobby. But I've got to tell you, it was a joy to meet you at this tremendous Esther Conference in Carthage. I remember when Sister Burgess came to our Esther Conference that we started. This will be the 19th year. Next year will be our 20th anniversary. And the Lord gave it to me 21 years ago. And so when I walked into Carthage, she had told me when she came up here, could she duplicate it in Carthage? I said, absolutely. And now she's taken it around the world. And also a lot of missionaries have come to me, and I've given them the papers and forms, and they've done it I just heard recently, they just started one in Vanuatu, if I said that country right. And they started one down there. So there's several places, but I was overwhelmed, overjoyed to see that burden continue on with Sister Burgess in Carthage. But I was speechless the whole time. I normally am a talker, but I was almost not a talker. I was just taking it in, enjoying it so much.
It was such a wonderful conference. So that was my first time to get to go. When Ada turned 10, we have the drama, the I Am production that we put on, and it was during the middle of that, so we weren't able to go. And then the next year I thought, oh, well, like I'll get tickets closer to time. Well, I didn't know that this conference is like a complete sellout and you have to stay up until midnight. Like, Sister Burgess, do you think the 10-year-olds who are buying these tickets, like, can you make it noon? So I'm setting my alarm for midnight. My daughter's making sure that this year, and I did. I got on at midnight. I got to get a ticket, thankfully, because they sold out within 24 hours. But I was blown away as well. It was such a wonderful conference, and it was just refreshing to see that. And then to see, like you said, that you had such a burden for it. And we'll get into that story here in a little bit. But I didn't realize that you were the pastor of your church now.
Yes. It is a challenge. We started the church as a home missions 37 years ago. And so the last years of my husband's life, he was very sick. And the pancreatic cancer, he'd lost 110 pounds. And now he didn't die from that, believe it or not. He died instantly of falling off the steps and hit his head. And when we were in the trauma center, the doctor said, in the strangest of ways, he said this was probably the most merciful death he could have had. Because if he had gone the whole length of the pancreatic cancer, it would have been not good. But the Lord was with us. I've got to tell you this. I want to talk to you about Esther. But I want to tell you how sweet God is. Now, my husband and I never had children. When I was young, I had cancer. So I lost all the ability to have children when I was young. But talking about that, I always thought in the ministry, I always had an underlying fear of who's going to take care of me when I'm old. And when you're in the ministry, as in the pastor, everything about your life, you receive your resources from the ministry. And because God's called you to that. But I had it in my head, who's going to take care of me when I'm an old person? And is God going to be there? Now, I hate to say that, being in the ministry over 50 years, but that always dogged me, my heels, especially just knowing that all my immediate family was dying. My mom, dad, sister, everybody was dying. And so I was going to be standing alone, and my husband and I. So I've got to tell you something real sweet. I'll do it quick. Sweetness of Jesus. Now, my husband was a hunter. He loved to hunt. and he loved to eat deer meat. And our freezer was full of deer meat and any fish he could catch. But what happened was about 7 months before he died, he started going to thrift stores. Now, this is not my husband. My husband was a full-time pastor. And if he did anything as a hobby, it would go hunting. And so he started going to thrift stores, buying recipe books, and got Post-it notes and started finding these recipes. And can you believe he went to the store and every recipe, he bought all the ingredients to go with that recipe. Now, I didn't know. I must confess I was a little frustrated because he didn't want me to cook in the house because the smell made him sick. Now, I don't know if it's because of my food or what I was cooking. He just wanted to go out to eat. He said, don't worry about it. And also, he didn't have that big of an appetite. So we would go out to eat, but here he was buying all this food. And he filled our freezer in our pantry, a cabinet freezer, full of meat and fish that went with the recipes. And my canned goods was like 4 layers, on top of each other. On top of each shelf, I had spices I never heard of, noodles I never thought about buying. It was ridiculous. And I told him, I said, honey, we're spending so much money on food, and yet we're going out to eat. He said, you'll eat it. You'll eat this food. So the night before he died, he was always the first one in bed. But that night I went to bed and I kept on saying, honey, aren't you coming to bed? Aren't you coming to bed? He said, I'll be there in a little bit. And it took him a while. Then he finally came to bed. He said, I sharpened all your knives. And I said, well, okay, thank you. And then the next morning he died. And so 2 weeks later, after his death, there was the quarantine of the United States. And everybody was quarantined. And here in Virginia, they were very strict. And so the restaurants were closed, everything was closed. And so about several weeks into the quarantine, someone in the church called me and said, do you need anything at the grocery store? And I went into the utility room, the pantry room, and I looked in that pantry. And I just turned around and I saw all those canned goods. I saw all that meat. And beside his recliner was still the stacks of those recipe books with Post-it notes of how to cook every bit of that. And in that room, the Lord spoke to me and said, see, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it. All that time, all those years, I felt that feeling of being dogged by what's going to happen to me. What's going to happen to me when I'm older. And I just want to give somebody encouragement that, to me, that was the supernatural. I had so much food. I fed my family, people in the church that didn't mind coming out of the quarantine. And I had so much food. And they did say 2020 was 20 pounds more. I don't know if that's happened. But I don't know why. I just wanted to share that. But since then, I feel that peace that God does take care of us. We think the inevitable, what could be, when all along God has it all taken care of. So that's that story. I just felt like sharing that, if you don't mind.
That is such a special story. Thank you so much
Yes.
for sharing that. And it is true. He talks about his eyes on the sparrow. Like if he cares about the sparrow and where he's sleeping and how he's eating, he cares about us. And he does. It reminds me, our principal, whenever I was growing up, her name was Betty Ollis. And she would always pray and say, God, you care. You really care. You really care. And that just is going over in my head during that story. Like, God, you care. You really care. He really does care about his people. And he's faithful to
He
those that are
is
faithful
faithful.
to him.
He is faithful.
So you are actually going all around the world and sharing your testimony. And you had mentioned to me that you've been doing that for about 40 years. So how did that get started?
Wow. Well, believe this or not, with you and I meeting, you probably didn't think this is true, but there was a time in my life when I was younger that I was terribly introverted. I don't know what happened was our family moved from Indianapolis to Tupelo in elementary school. And somehow or another, I just seemed out of sync with everything there in the school. And then I got just shy, backward, and I started failing junior high. I wasn't doing good. I had to do summer school every year, summer school to get up to the next grade. And so one day the principal called my mom and dad, and they said, we'd like to meet with you and my dad and myself in his office. And when we went in there, I was fixing to go to high school, a senior high school. And the principal met with my mom and dad and said, your child has made, F's, D's, and we just don't think that she's capable of going into her 10th grade or the high school years. We felt like she needs to go to special education. Well, thank God we have that for those that need it. But we got in the car after that meeting, and I remember looking at my mother in the front seat, and I was just really devastated behind them in the car. And my mother looked back at me and she said, Donna, no, I don't believe it. I believe inside of you, there's something great and marvelous inside of you. And God is going to bring that out. Well, my mother was a full-time nursing supervisor. And so that summer was the decision of my family whether or not the school was going to let me go into the 10th grade. And so my mother started praying and fasting. And I think every day that summer, she kept on saying, God's going to do something marvelous. He's going to do it. And I didn't see where it was going to happen because I was still chubby. And I thought, oh, that's going to change or something's going to happen, But secretly, I love to sing. So I would go in my bedroom and just play like I'm singing, like someone at church or a solo. Or I remember one particular Bible college came in, they were singing, and I went to my bedroom trying to act like I was singing in that Bible college choir. But come high school, my mother said, the day she dropped me off, she said, now today is going to be the greatest day of your life. God did it. God broke it, whatever it is. So when I got out of that school, I still see it coming out. Those people in that school that were bullies in the other schools, and I definitely was being bullied. When I got out, they said, hey, fatso, hey, big mama, we heard that you're just crazy, or what all the words they said. Well, then I thought nothing's changed. So I go, and at the end of the school day, I went and hid in a huge bathroom in the back of the school. Now, the school I went to was like an old high school, those brick high schools, and the bathrooms is full of ceramic tile. And I was in there and I was waiting for everybody to leave the school. And then I thought, all of a sudden, I'm going to start singing in here, because I was holding my books and I started singing to hear it, the acoustics echoing in there. And I thought it'd be so fabulous. So I just started singing something and was enjoying myself, when all of a sudden I heard someone had flushed a commode. Oh my word, I was terrified. I mean, there were like, I don't know, about 40 stalls in there. And I went, oh my goodness. So I literally started running out of that bathroom and down a corridor, like there was a wall, a hall, and then out into the hall. And I start walking real fast. And all of a sudden I heard someone say, hello, stop, you stop. And this person was like a Marine sergeant. She was that way. And I turned around and looked at her, and she said, what's your name? And at the time, I said, my name's Donna Shepherd. And she said, you come here right now. And she said, I want you to try out for chorale in the morning. And I said, I can't. And she said, oh, I never want to hear that from you ever again. I mean, it was terror. I was terrorized. She said, I never want to hear that from you ever again. So I went, Mom was waiting for me. She said, what took you so long? I told her what happened. She said, I want you to try out. Well, I said, Mother, I can't. I got into my bedroom. I acted like I was singing in front of the mirror. And then the next morning I did try out, and I started. She said, I want you to sing. And I said, I can't. I said that statement again. I promise you, that was the last time I ever said it to her. And she said, sing a song. And I said, well, all the songs I know is just Jesus songs. She said, just sing a Jesus song. She was like that. And she was from up in New York. And I started singing Amazing Grace. Well, I got the first chair, first soprano, high soprano. And that bursted the ceiling out of me. And so up till then, every report card, every 6 weeks was a death march. Coming home, to hand in my F, my D's, F's, and all that. Well, this time I brought my report card home. I handed it to my mother, and I'm my mother. I'm ditto mother. She was a drama queen. She grabbed her heart. She fell on the couch. She started just praising Jesus. And I had gotten on the honor roll. And so when I graduated from high school, I had graduated with honors. And I told my cohorts of my graduation class, if you hear anybody crying, it's my mother. And in high school, they nicknamed me Shep. So we were walking down the aisle, and I could hear my mother. And someone in my class said, I think I hear your mother. It's my mother. But today, everything I've done certainly has been the Lord. But every experience of standing before a crowd of thousands of people, there's something in my mind. I always see my mother, seeing her pray that whatever was holding me in bondage was break off. So then that opened the world to me. So I've been in the ministry all these years, and getting in front of a crowd doesn't bother me now at all. Of course, we go in the strength of the Lord, but the Lord opened my world like that. It opened it like that.
That is just so much proof of how much influence that we really do have over our children.
Yes.
And, I honestly have seen, I feel like over time, and I understand too, because I have a daughter that's going into like the preteen age group, and you can start being a little bit uncool to your kids. I'm not probably quite there yet, but you're kind of getting there. And I think that it is such a lie of the enemy to try to hold moms back from speaking into your kids' life, from praying over them. If your mom would not have stood up to that, and I'm sure There were probably times you were embarrassed or times you were like, oh, Mom, I'm so sure. But she didn't quit. She kept going. She didn't stop. And she changed the trajectory of your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. She changed everything. And she infused in me confidence. She would say to me, I know this sounds silly, but of course we grew up in a sort of a country church. And every Sunday in that day, the pastor would say, what family is going to clean the church this week? And my mother would raise her hand every time and say, the shepherds will. And I used to think, is there no one else in the church to clean the church? But my mother used that. I remember as a teenager, I was cleaning the commode, and my mother walked over. She stood at the door and she looked at me and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, Jesus is looking at you right now and just smiling so big because you're washing this commode for the house of God. And I'm 15, 16 years old, and I'm thinking, oh, well, okay, and so she would stand in the sanctuary, we're vacuuming the rugs, and she'd stop it. And she said, now I want you to get up there and sing for me. And I would just stand and sing there with her. And she'd just sit on the pew and she'd have a tissue crying. And she was over the top drama, I promise you. But that affirmation and that confidence. And the other thing she always said was, oh my word, I'm feeling Jesus. I'm feeling Jesus. And I'm not saying she wasn't, but she would always tap into the spirit realm of the capabilities of me. And she would just say things like that all the time before anything. And believe it or not, my mother didn't get the Holy Ghost till she was 40. So my mother was really a new convert. But when she got it full force. When she got the Lord, she got plugged in to the power source. But yeah, a mother can change the direction of a child. They really can, by the wording, the affirmation, the prayer, and just not being so caught up with their own life that they sort of let the child just do whatever they want to do. And so my mother was very, very much like that. She was a lot of fun, but I think she had every antenna of NASA on her
head. It's just amazing to think about, and I feel like we could do a whole podcast on that topic of, just not allowing the devil to silence the mothers, because I feel like that's where he's at. He's trying to silence them. I have seen and have had mothers even tell me before, like, well, I can't really pray for my child or with my child because then they shut down. I'm like, if the enemy can keep you there in your mind there, he has won the battle, because no one is going to ever pray for my children like I'm going to pray for my children. No one is going to pray for a child like a mother. There's something about mother's prayers. The Bible talks about mother's prayers, and just not being afraid and ashamed and just being bold enough to tell the devil, you're going to fight. I'm fighting too. I'm fighting back.
Well, listen, I am a recipient of that. When I was in senior high school, my friends had decided that they were going to get me to do something that would have not been right. And it was during lunch. And those girls had come into that bathroom and they brought a bunch of stuff. And they were going to say, we're going to change you. And so they decided, they laid it all out. And so all of a sudden there, I still remember in that bathroom, I could just see my mother in my head. And I thought, if I did this, my mother would be devastated. Now, at that time, teenagers are not that God conscious. Some are, some do get that way. But there is a God consciousness that comes when that baton is handed over to God. They're not that perceptive spiritually. They're not that mature spiritually. And so my mother was a very wise woman, but so that day I did not do it. But I want to share with you what happened. So I come home from school, and on the front porch, my mother's standing there waiting on me. And I get out of the car and I'm walking up. This is probably my senior year in high school, my senior year. And I'm walking to the front door and my mother's crying. And I said, Mother, what's wrong? What's wrong? She said, honey, what happened to you around lunch today? What happened? I've been burdened all day around lunchtime. Something happened with you. What is it? What is it? And the first thing I said was, Mom, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. So I told her what my friends were thinking I was going to do. And my mother, she immediately, she said, oh my Lord, the devil's trying to get my baby. The devil's trying to get my baby. And do you know, she took me in the living room. She said, baby, the devil's trying to get you. Well, I'm not, I'm not conscious of all that. And so she said, baby, the devil's trying to get you. All of a sudden, I was afraid of the devil getting me. And I didn't have the perception of the devil. But she said, let's get down and pray. So I went down on the floor there in the living room on the carpet, and my mother just rebuking the devil. And I was so scared the devil's trying to get me. But in saying that made me acutely aware of the devil, that he would want to get me. And so my mama, she just cried and was praying over me. And I can't say I was doing a great prayer warrior. I wasn't. I was just scared to death. But her showing me the world of darkness and what it could do to me. So after she got through praying, she said, baby, the devil wants you, but Jesus has a life for you. And she just went on and on. And I want to say something about my mother. I heard this statement, and my mother was this way. A good mother is fun, a parent, fun, fair, and firm. They can laugh, they're fun, they're fair, and they're firm. And so my mom was all three of those things. And oh yes, a mother has the greatest strength and power from God. And I don't want to delay this or prolong this, but I want to say this statement. The other thing that was absolutely wonderful was my mother was true blue all the way through. She was exactly what she was at church and what she was at home. There was no variation, none whatsoever. And so I respected Mother. I honored her, knowing that she would come through the night after she'd get home from work. She worked 3 to 11, the nursing where she worked at. And I would hear her walk through the house praying. And God forbid, I hate to say it that way, we wouldn't open our eyes up, because if we opened our eyes up, we'd have to start praying. So we kept our eyes closed, but we could hear it. But she was true. But people that forfeit their responsibility as a parent, mother, the results will not be good.
Such a responsibility that the Lord has given us. And you talked about that you couldn't have children, but the Lord gave you this Esther Conference, and he gave you a burden for that and for others' children. And so I would like for you to share maybe how that burden come on you and what you have done with that.
Well, all the things I've done in 50 years of ministry, this is the most fulfilling thing that God has ever given to my heart. And 21 years ago, I was driving down the interstate here in Virginia. I was leaving the camp that we had in our district, and it was late at night, and I was listening to public radio. And I really had lost sight of what they were talking about. And then all of a sudden, this statement came across the public radio was, the new flesh on the market. And I thought, well, what's the new flesh on the market? And they were interviewing, as much as it was heartrending, the top dollar, and this is really true, the top dollar prostitution in New York was a girl that was 12 years old or 13. And they were interviewing her, and they were interviewing gangs of that age. That's the interview. And this commentator said, well, whoever else they were talking to, the new flesh on the market is tweens. And they said there's a corporation. They started the Victoria's Secret, but then they wanted to tap into the tween age. They make, at that time, Pink stores was making more money than Victoria's Secret was. And they said the purpose of that was that the new flesh on the market merchandise is to tap into the girls' sensualness early. And when that was said, honestly, I cannot tell you, Jamie, what happened. I was on this interstate. It felt like someone got a fist and slammed my chest. I started wailing and crying and almost wrecked on the interstate. I was heaving out my heart. I drove off and I parked at a 7-Eleven, and I was just crying out, and it seemed like a zillion miles a minute in my head. The Lord gave me Esther. I could see all the classes. I could see what it all was. And I could just see how it could be done. So I called my district secretary. I'm like the ladies president of our district, of our churches. And I called her real quick. It was about 11 at night. And she's an English major. And I told her, I said, go to the computer real quick. I'm going to tell it to you now. And that right then, she wrote everything God gave me. And the thing that I love about Sister Burgess, Esther, is she's carried the true essence of it. Because before we started the Esther, I spent 1 year, and I appointed our directors to spend 1 year. First of all, we had to get it approved financially and get it all going, to study that age group, 10 to 15. And there's a significance of why that age is it. And that is when we started studying that age, the tweens, we found out this is child psychology. There is a vulnerable window in that age where whatever is put into them, whatever decisions they commit in their mind and they cling to, they will make their life decisions till they're 24, what they glean from 10 to 15 years old. So you think they make their decisions when they're 18, 19 years old. No, they're making it from 10 to 15 years old. And then I studied that that's why the Jews do the bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah. That vulnerable window is if you can get them committed to serving the Lord. And that's what we did with our Esther. We directly teach them. And do you know what? Those Esther girls, we take them in their classes. We teach them the truth. We have fun. We have great time with them. But we don't just treat it as a little foo-foo, a little cotton candy time. We directly teach them. And do you know that God told me that is what you're to do? This window is open. So you've got to go in and teach truth. And now this year's our 19th year. We're anniversaries next year. And I can't tell you how many people from the Esther Conference are now in full-time ministry. And I feel like Esther, it's a commitment time. And it's a time that they come to realization. And I'm just beyond excited and overwhelmed at how it is a God plan. It is a God gave the burden. And just knowing that it's going all around the world. And just to know that there was something only God knew was if you can get them during this time period with the truth, love, and care and affirmation, then they'll make the best decisions in their life to serve the Lord. And that's how Esther started.
It was so personal to me whenever you shared that story about that age limit, because I watched that in my own personal life. So my father did not backslide until I was 14. But my youngest sister was 7. And then I had a sister in the middle, and she was only about 2 years younger than me. So the way that I made decisions as a teen were totally different, especially than the way my youngest sister made decisions as a teen. And I know whenever you had said that age limit, I'm like, that is so true. That's like, it describes how we have made decisions as adults completely. And I know the Lord can make up the difference and he can turn things around. But whenever you're raising children in the church and in the truth, in that age group and in that, it's way more important, I feel like, than what we as even parents realize.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, and another thing you said earlier, the other thing that when I read on child psychology, I read books on teenage minds. I mean, being that don't have children, I didn't know what I was dealing with. And so I started reading even secular child psychology, everything I could find. But one of the things that startled me was, and you said it a bit earlier, one of the most detrimental things a parent does to a child. Now, this is not from my opinion. This was documented. When children are able to feed themselves, dress themselves, wash themselves, there's something mechanism in a parent that feels like basically their job is done. They don't have to come in and direct it as much as they did. Now, we understand that we want our children to learn to be independent and stand on their own 2 feet. But it's said in this child psychology book that I read years ago that parents sort of feels released Like, oh, I don't have to worry that they're getting up late. I don't have to worry as long as they graduate from high school, and I get them in college, I can go to my office or I can do my own thing. No, 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 no. Their influence is as desperately needed during that time. And in this one area, one thing I read was they need life skills, spiritual skills. The other thing was, I was stunned on this. I don't know what I thought it was, but it said a boy or a girl, their heroes are same-sex heroes. So every child needs to have we would say mentor, but in that particular book I read, they need heroes. That is why these girl singers, these girls go berserko over them. The boys go berserko over something. They're trying to lasso their projection forward to some hero that they admire, to pull them forward into something they desire and dream of. And so they don't know what to do, but when one sparkles brighter, they'll grab it. And so I personally believe, and I was privileged to have a mother like that, but I also had heroes in the church, people that affirmed me. It sounds funny, but we had an elderly woman on a walker that would come down the middle aisle, and she was one of those patriarchs. And as teenagers, we were embarrassed if she called us out. She would go down with her walker and she would point at us. Maybe me this Sunday, the boy was another Sunday, but she'd point and just start speaking in tongues and worship the Lord. And she'll say, Donna, oh my Lord. And she's just speaking the Lord and talking to Jesus. God's going to use you mightily. Now, I may have been just that Sunday, but next Sunday was another guy or someone else. But that seems funny to us and ridiculous. But do you know that did something to my spirit? And she would say something good. Oh, I saw you at the altar. I just cried my eyes out, and you'd be embarrassed. And we were embarrassed as teenagers, but that branded something in our spirit. And our Sunday school teacher. And so I was privileged. Not only that, I had a sister that was 8 years older than me that had a tremendous walk with God. And so I was beyond privileged, had a mother and a sister that were with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength serving the Lord. And so I had a hero in me, and I had the privilege of that. But I think that's where now, even now, when I walk into church, I see a bunch of children, and I'll go, oh my word, what? Oh, pick up that tissue for me. And they pick up the tissue. I just did this past Sunday, a little 5-year-old. I said, can you pick that tissue up? They did. I said, oh, Jesus is smiling at you right now. But that's real. And that vulnerable window, 10 to 15 years old, that is a God, somehow or another, there's a vulnerable window. And not only, let me tell you, that's where you have to protect it. Because not only is it a wonderful window, vulnerable window, but it's also a window that has to be protected. Because children can be put in situations and environments that can really hurt them.
Especially today. I think about social media, technology, the way things are. I can't imagine, and I feel like every parent grandparent feels this way, that you weren't raised with that. And then now as adults, we realize that we don't even always know how to cope with social
Absolutely.
media and what's on there. And then people allowing their children, and then that 10 to 15-year-old window, having a form of social media or being able to get on their phones, being able to have all this access to this world, that it's too much.
Oh, it is too much. We were privileged just recently to have Sister McCoy with us. She is a full-time children evangelist. She's also a clinical psychologist. And I didn't know this. We were sitting talking, as a matter of fact, about Esther. And we were talking about that age and vulnerability, but she talked about social media. And she says something that I wish I could remember it exactly. She'll be back with me at the end of June, but I was wanting her to talk to our church family about it. But that children right here in the brain, this area right here, is the pleasure part of the brain where you feel pleasure. You feel akin to whatever you're looking at. And she said, children cannot, or even young teenagers or tweens, cannot act it out yet, but they have received pleasure, whatever it is, pleasure of killing a bunch of people on a game, and they killed 20 people and they won the game. That resonated in their brain, pleasure. And even though we think that is no big deal, it's just on a screen, that pleasure will stay in there until they're an adult. And then they're adult enough to act on it. Now, I'm not saying they're going to all be mass murderers, but she said there's something in that pleasure realm. And she said that's why it must be monitored. It is on my phone. I have little children play with it, and I had someone to put on there these little games, and it's supposed to be totally ad-free. And I went out with them, and the little boy asked for my phone. I gave it to him, totally ad-free. And I was sitting beside him, and all of a sudden, there comes this ad. And I took it from him. I said, oh, no, I don't know how that got on there. This devil that is roaring about seeking whom he may devour is finding traps for us. And, in my day, you had to search to find sin. But today, you don't have to search for it. It's there, which grieves my spirit. We had to search for it. I mean, we had to go after it. But now it comes after us. And it grieves my heart. The Esther girls, when they come to the Esther Conference, oh my goodness, I've seen some really terrific stories of my Esther girls. But I'll tell you this, not only are the Esther girls, last year we had, I don't know how many received the power of God when they came. We had 10 get the Holy Ghost. But not only do we have them, but their parents, their mothers get the Holy Ghost. They come to Sunday school, and the Sunday school teacher brings them, and they invite the mother who don't go to church, and they come, and then they have been transformed. And it has not only reached out to the girls, but it's awakening the mothers. And we have sessions for the mothers and teaching the chaperones and everything like that. But my heart goes out to every parent. It really, really does. It really does.
It is a scary time. There's no doubt, but it's also, we have power.
Oh,
and we have the
oh,
power of prayer, and it's a good time to also be raising children. It's just that we have to stay aware. We have to stay on our feet. We have to stay, like you said, your mom was stayed in the power of prayer. She kept that prayer going in your home and over you. And we as moms, we just can't slack.
well, and yes, and I tell you, it sounds funny, but we had so many doors anointed with oil, and she would drag us with her. We're going to pray over this door. When my mom got the Holy Ghost, she was 40, and my dad would be on the couch drinking his drink, cussing his cussing, doing his thing. And my mother, if we had a snow day and we didn't go to Sunday school, oh, we're not getting to go to church because it's snowing. No, we're having church in the back of the house. And my mother bought a little tambourine, and my brother and I, at the time, or my sister, we would choose which one was going to preach, sing, and testify. And we had that little tambourine and play that little tambourine. But I tell you the thing about my mother that I loved was she was so fun, so much fun. And she made sure we lived a holy and a righteous life. But she made everything so fun, but also so scary. If she thought the devil was getting too close to the house. My dad was a design engineer, and he was very in the military. In World War II, he was a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps. So he was quite something else, very authoritative. But when my dad got a raise or vacation or we're going somewhere, my mother would get us 3 kids and take us all the way in the house, back of the house, where mom and dad's bedroom bathroom was. And she'd say, now, children, we know your daddy's smart, but guess who's given us a vacation? Jesus. Guess who just gave daddy a bonus? Jesus. She was a strategist. Everything was Jesus. If we got a new pair of shoes, guess who just got us these shoes? She was determined to just highlight Jesus and then show how bad the devil was. And it branded it in our heart. It sure did.
And I'm sure it was worth it to her, and it's worth it to you.
Absolutely. I live off of that.
And you've shared
really
shared it with so many of us. Whenever you had said that you couldn't have children, and then to know that you had such a burden for those girls and to create that Esther Conference, that really did something to me. I was crying whenever you were telling that, because I thought, some people would have put that burden off and said, well, I don't have children, and, I'm not a mother, so maybe I shouldn't speak into this age group, but you didn't.
No, I think it was one of the greatest honors. And also, in a strange way, the thing I always dreamed I got. When I go now, this past year, I went to a huge general conference. I'm walking down we're coming out of church, and all of a sudden I heard 3 girls holler, Sister Linville, we're Esther's. We're Esther's. And I turned around, and there were 3 girls. One had a baby in her arms with their husbands. And they said, we were the first graduates of the first year. This is my husband. We pastor here. My husband here. We're in the ministry. And we were the first Esther graduates. I tell you what, I cried. They hugged me, and I looked at all their babies, and I was just overwhelmed. And I think the thing about serving the Lord is, even though I don't have children, that element inside my heart was filled with the service of the Lord And then the very thing that I always dream of having, I got. And I wish we had more time. There's so many benefits of what God has done and how he's filled my life with babies and children. But this Esther Conference was the eclipse of my life. And now I see them everywhere. And this year, our Esther girls on our committee, I'm trying to think how many on the committee is the Esther graduates. So there's going to be a time in the future I'm going to have to hand over the baton. So now some of the directors are Esther graduates. And so they're carrying on the baton and going forward with it.
That is so special.
Yes. I can't tell you the first one we did, I thought I was fixing to be just gone up into the third heaven and float away. I was so overwhelmed. I could not. We had 400, some maybe more, but I was just stunned. Yes.
That's so amazing. I know that we've probably taken up a lot of your time today, but
Enjoyed it.
Talking on that, maybe speak really quickly into someone that they may feel like starting something or God's placed something on their heart. They've got this burden, but maybe they're not sure how to get it started, or they just feel inadequate. They've got these excuses, but they know that God is calling them to something.
Well, I'm going to go back to that knowledge of doing that. There's something about where the scripture is 1 talent, 5 talent, 10 talents. Now, I may felt like that, God, you're speaking to me about something that I don't have a talent for, or I don't know how to get this done or do that. Well, the minute you say I can't, then that statement that God put into your mind, if it benefits the kingdom of God, it's not your brain. It's not something that you just thought up. If it's to benefit the kingdom of God. So years ago, before we started this home missions church, we worked with Brother J.T. Pugh in Odessa, Texas. And I noticed I had gone to college in a music college or Bible college, but it was predominantly highlighted with music in JCM. But I noticed they didn't have any children's Christmas plays or anything for children. They had Sunday school, but that's it. So I was sitting in the sanctuary, and all of a sudden a thought came in my mind of they need to have a children's musical, like a Christmas musical or something. And down by the creek bank, just something. And so I went to Brother Pugh, our pastor, and I said, Brother Pugh, it would be wonderful if we could have a children's play or musical or something like that. Now, I don't read music. And so Brother Pugh looked at me. He said, well, you had the thought. You do it. Well, I told him I don't read music. I don't know how to do that. He said, well, you know what? God told you, he gave you the illumination of the thought, then you do whatever it takes to get it done. And the first one I did was down by the creek bank. It's an old one, years ago. And how I did it was, I couldn't read music, but I would put on that book of music, I put breathe 4 times and then start. Clap 1 time and then start. I didn't even know the rest, like 3 I didn't know any of that. And take 3 deep breaths and then start it. and that's how I learned. I didn't know any of that music. And we had 59 children in that musical. And then it expanded. We did it 3 times. The audience was packed with school teachers, principals. It was just a success to the uttermost. So for those people, so I learned from that. When God gives you the thought, no matter how inadequate you feel, it's like the 5 talents, the one that sort of had the thought, let's just say the 1 talent, sort of had the thought, he buries it, no return. Oh, we know what happened to him. But the one that had the 5 talents, they multiplied it. And I found out with God that whatever effort, and the other thing is, you've got to be willing not to have so much pride in you. Pride. That if you make a mistake, it's not that big of a deal. It's all to the glory of God. God is going to be glorified. But I've seen people that God has asked them to do things. Oh, I don't want to get up there and look like a silly person or something dumb. Or if I get up there and I look foolish. You just completely diminished the forward giftings of God. You just diminished that. Why ask someone to do something again that wouldn't take the 1 talent and give it back to me? So I won't add no more to you. You just close the Aladdin door to your life. So you've got to be willing to be silly. You've got to be willing to make a mistake, and so what? And you're doing it unto the Lord, and then let God be great, and God will do it. Of course, you want to do it to the best of your ability, but what ability you have, it is grown by God. It's grown by God. But I always feel sad for people. I have a friend that's absolutely terrified of flying. And her husband has wanted to go in the ministry of ministering overseas and missions and stuff like that. That world has just narrowed down to 0 because that first step of the voice of God was fixing to open up avenues that would blow your mind. But you close that 1 talent, it won't open to 2 or 3. And I feel sorry for people that sees themselves, I don't want to be ridiculous or look like whatever. No, anything you do for God will multiply.
I feel like everything that you just said was a whole sermon. Oh, that was so good. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we like to ask, what is one last thought or one last thing that you would leave to the Unashamedly You community?
Well, my last thought I want to share is there is the most beautiful world out there that when it's generated by God's power, there's an illumination of the Spirit that God will create in you the glory, a purpose, and a plan for your life, in my life. And there is not a day till the last day you breathe your breath that God doesn't want to use you. There is nothing, as long as you're alive, 80, 90, 60, 70s, God has a purpose for your life. And to sit back and not do it, you will dry up and be the most miserable person in the world. So come on. I heard a statement that says, oh, I'm afraid. I'm afraid to go to the edge. I'm afraid to go to the edge of the cliff. No. And I heard a voice tell me, come. I'm too afraid. And so then one day I heard that voice again. And with fear and a little, just barely little baby steps, I walked to the edge. He pushed me. I flew. And that's what I feel like. God just pushed, and then I flew. And it's been one of the greatest lives, flying and being free in the Spirit of God and being just feeling the wind beneath my wings. So I pray to everyone out there, release your flesh and let God become magnifying and glorifying in your life.
Such a word that you have given all of us. I know that you have been so blessed by this podcast, but if no one else has, I have truly been so enriched by everything that you have shared on this podcast today. And I'm humbled that you would hop on here and share your life story and give all these things to us, but also just honored. And I feel convicted, I guess I could say, to go out and to allow the Lord to just walk to the edge and to push us to do more
and
for
fly.
Him and for His kingdom. And yes, to fly in Jesus' name. So thank you so much for being on this podcast today.
It's an honor.
You've been a blessing to us.
It's a great honor. I appreciate you. Bye-bye.
If you're not a part of our email list yet, make sure to subscribe over at unashamedlyu.com. And as always, thank you for listening to another episode on the Unashamedly You podcast. This community was created to bring encouragement to you, and you are giving it to others by sharing a podcast that has helped or blessed you. There is no community like the community of kingdom-minded women going after their calling. Go be unashamedly you.